The country should be aspiring for the overall development of its youth, which is definitely not possible by turning them into machines. The problem is not in the number of working hours. There are structural issues here that have to be addressed, and making a scapegoat of the workers, that seems to be the easiest thing in any way that these people will always do. Which is why you have India ranking 7th in the global list of hardworking people. Indians are already working much too hard. So the endeavor has always been to exploit to the extent possible. And yeah, it is a continuing battle. This is not just about Narayana Murthy.
Yeah.
Narayana Murthy is just giving voice to what the capitalist class have always wanted. More hours for you to exploit the workers, and the state is, in that sense, the weapon of this class, and so it speaks the same language. This is ultimately what Mr. Narayana Murthy wants, and every other employer wants. They want their dictatorship to run in their industries. They don't want any rules. They don't want any laws over there. And what is the underlying fight? What is the underlying reason for that? It is to maximize their profits. If they are so concerned about the nation's growth, they can very easily donate their wealth to the nation. No one's stopping them from doing that. One does not see that happening.
Hello, this is Anna Isaac, and joining me today is Clifton D'Rozario, who is a labor lawyer. He's a CPIML leader and a trade union leader. We're here to discuss what Narayana Murthy has said about a 70-hour work week. I want to firstly thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, and what do you make of his suggestion or proposal for India's youth to basically work 11 to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, essentially?
Yeah, obviously this is something that's really not something that the country should be aspiring for. The country should be aspiring for the overall development of its youth, which is definitely not possible by turning them into machines. And a comprehensive development means, of course, skill is definitely necessary. But beyond skill, it is also how do you ensure that the youth become responsible citizens? How do they participate in this democracy? How do they ensure that the governments are held accountable, that the political parties stay true to the constitution, so on and so forth? Of course, that is the kind of development that one should really be thinking of when one talks about the youth. So it's very unfortunate, but it's not surprising. Traditionally, if you were to look at the 8-hour working day, it wasn't a gift that was given to the working class. So with the Industrial Revolution, when you looked at the 19th century, when the Industrial Revolution happened and the kind of slave labor conditions that persisted at that time, it took some really mammoth struggles of the working class to wrest the 8-hour working day from the hands of the capitalists and the state that was completely on their side. And ever since, it's always been that battle to retain it. And it's not just that right. Every single right that the working class enjoys today, and when I mean the working class, I'm not, generally one thinks of workers only in factories. I'm saying with the rights that are enjoyed by anybody, whether they're working in the government, whether they're working in private industries, the IT sector, any single sector, from a monthly wage to a timely wage to leave to an 8-hour working day. Each of these rights have been, hard-won victories of the working class. So this constant battle between capital and labor, this is just another manifestation of this. So it's really not surprising.
So he has given two justifications for this. He said that India can progress only if we increase our work productivity, and that can only be done if India's youth work harder. And he's also said that countries like Japan and Germany did this after the Second World War to rebuild their countries. So what do you make of these justifications?
I mean, if this was something that was rooted in any kind of fact, one could respond to it in a more, factual manner. There are enough number of studies that have shown that there is no link in that sense between the number of working hours and the productivity. So there's several studies that the ILO in fact comes out with this. The working hours. What is the number of working hours generally across the country? And if you look at that data that has been released this year in 2023, India stands 7th on that list globally. So we are already one of the most hardworking people that you have in this country. And we are surrounded by states like Ghana, Lesotho, etc., which are very, very poor countries. And if you look at the top 10 global economies, India is the one that ranks highest in the in terms of the hardworking category. So really, this notion that we are uh, that our productivity is lower because we are not working hard, it doesn't answer to the facts, as it were. In fact, there is enough of a case at this point for the state to actually think about how you can reduce the number of hours, increase the number of wages, so that people actually can live lives, better lives. And of course that will also mean that you have happier workers, you have a situation where production can be increased. Now if you go back historically, there's this I read about this, that Mr. Narayan Murthy said, took the specific examples of Germany and Japan. That's really not the case. There's a very interesting story of how during World War I, there was this entire several studies were carried. World War, of course, because of the entire munition industry, they had to have a lot of production at that point. So several studies were carried at that time to see whether there is a linkage between the number of working hours and productivity. And what you found was the longer the working hours, actually productivity dips. So Ford in 1918, they introduced this policy where they reduced the number of working hours, increased the wages, and of course production absolutely went through the roof at that point. So that is that's the kind of history that we have. And even Germany and Japan, it's really not true that that they suddenly had workers working like slaves to ensure that production increased. It was various other policies that were undertaken by them. And in fact, if you were to look at if you want to get a proper sense of it, countries like Norway, Finland, etc., they have very, very high productivity rates, whereas the number of hours that they work is much lesser than what Indians actually work. So if you were to address the productivity problem, then let's address the productivity problem. The problem is not the number of working hours. There are structural issues here that have to be addressed, and making a scapegoat of the workers, that seems to be the easiest thing in any way that these people will always do.
So much of this debate around what he has said has largely revolved around, white collar jobs. But what about the working class? What about blue collar jobs? What are their working hours like? What is their compensation with regard to overworking or putting in those extra hours?
Yeah, see, like I said, if you look at the 8-hour working day, it gets institutionalized by virtue of studies, of various struggles that happened in the 19th century. And of course, we all celebrate May Day. Everyone knows about May Day. But if you look at May Day, what is the story of May Day? May Day basically was in 1886, a couple of years before that. The workers decided that, we're tired of these 12-hour working days. We want an 8-hour working day. So they declared that May 1st of 1886 will be an 8-hour working day. And you had lakhs and lakhs of workers in the US who downed their tools in support of that particular demand. Of course, there's the incident that happens in Haymarket where there are bombs thrown into the crowd, workers die over there, several of them are killed in police firing, and their main leaders are arrested, taken to jail, and subsequently three of them, if I'm not mistaken, actually hung to death. It's only thereafter that you have various laws that were passed in various countries. ILO recognizes this in 1918, saying the ETA is mandatory, and so that's how it gets institutionalized. And of course, if you come to India, I think we cannot forget the contributions of Baba Saheb Ambedkar. When he was the labor member in the Viceroy's Council, this must have been in the 1940s, late 1930s, was when he introduces an amendment to the Factories Act to institutionalize the 8-hour working day for our country, and that's how then it gets translated into statutory law. Now, keeping that background in mind, so the ideal has always been an 8-hour working day. It's a very simple thing: 8 hours of work, 8 hours of rest, 8 hours to do whatever you want, recreation, your own development, so on and so forth. Now, there's always been an attempt to extend that working day in the name of overtime, in the name of whatever you want. And the blue collar, the factory workers have really, in that sense, whatever development that the country has enjoyed at this point in time, it's basically the toil of it's the labor of the working class that has ensured that. So there's always been an effort to extend the working hour to, basically, again, it's about whether you see the workers as human beings who contribute to the growth of this country, not just as not just as somebody who owns a particular skill that can be employed on a shop floor, but as a citizen, as a person in a democratic kind of a setup. That's the contest. So the to reduce the worker to a machine has always been the endeavor. So even today, of course, the struggle is always there. I mean, which is why you have India ranking 7th in the global list of hardworking people. Indians are already working much too hard. If you and the kind of economic slowdown, the kind of disastrous economic policies of the union government have meant longer working hours already for workers. So if you look at in a city like Bangalore, say your Swiggy and your Zomato, etc. The number of hours that each of them are working is definitely more than 8 hours, and I'm not sure. I mean, of course, no one wants to do that. You look at your cab drivers, the number of hours that they are working. So the endeavor has always been to exploit to the extent possible, and yeah, it is a continuing battle.
That actually brings me to my next question. It's not just Narayana Murthy and corporate leaders. It's also government. So I mean, states like Karnataka have changed their labor laws. They've pushed from no longer an 8 hours to 12 hours. They've amended the Factories Act. Tamil Nadu as well tried to do the same thing, but there was a lot of pushback and they withdrew their bill. So what do you make of these new changes to the labor laws?
No, that's like I said. See, this has been a long-standing thing. If you look at all the labor laws that are there, the corpus of labor laws that have provided some kind of entitlement to the workers. Some of them have been realized, but some of them are also aspirational. So you have a minimum wage act, so you fight for it. The constitution talks about living wage, so you fight for it. So there's also the aspirational kind of a notion attached to these kinds of statutory entitlements. In terms of the attack on these laws, I would say there's been three ways in which these laws have been attacked for the last 75 years. The Minimum Wage Act is 1948. The Industrial Disputes Act is 1947. So you have a lot of these statutes which are from that time. So the way they've been, one is of course they've been diluted over a period of time. One of the best ways to render any law of no consequence is by not implementing it at all. And so that's been one front on which these laws have been attacked. The second front on which these laws have been attacked are progressively diluting of these laws by various judicial pronouncements. I'm not going to give details in it. Much has been written about it. And the third has been the constant kind of constant effort to amend the laws. So if you were to look at, it's been happening for a while now, but I'll just go back last few years. So very interesting thing happens when COVID hits India. So COVID hits India, you have lockdown, etc., etc. On 5th of May 2020, the union government sends out a communication to all the state governments saying that, see, this is a time of crisis. You have to ensure now that the labor laws are relaxed. And one of the points that they specifically state in that letter is that the working hour has to be increased from 8 to 12 hours. So you have that. Then you have, of course, the central government, the union government rather, which introduces the labor codes, the code of wages, which contains the working hour provisions. It as an extendable working day from 8 hours to 12 hours, which gives the employers a lot of play to exploit it. And then you have a lot of state governments that actually brought in ordinances, amendments, notifications during that time. Himachal Pradesh, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, all of which extended the working day to 12 hours. But there was a solid pushback against these notifications, against the labor code, which is why even till today, the labor codes are not in force. And now, unfortunately, after all of that, you suddenly have the Karnataka government, which is the previous government, of course. It was the BJP government, the Bommai government that introduced that amendment, increasing the number of hours to 12. And of course, they wore it as a matter of pride that amendment was brought in to accommodate Foxconn in Karnataka. Tamil Nadu did the same thing. But Tamil Nadu faced such a huge pushback from the unions that they had to withdraw it. So yeah, which is why I keep saying that this is not just about Narayana Murthy.
Yeah.
Narayana Murthy is just giving voice to what the capitalist class have always wanted. More hours for you to exploit the workers, and the state is in that sense the weapon of this class, and so it speaks the same language.
Yeah, and governments are pushing for these so-called reforms in the name of global competitiveness or flexibility in the working hours of women. So I mean, what do you make of their justifications?
Yeah, see, depends on what we want to address. If you were to look at you look at the kind of indicators that are there. For instance, your any of your human rights indicators, malnutrition, access to water, housing, so on and so forth. Any of them, we rank way, way below that. If you were to look at the kind of the quality of life that people have in this country, where again, we have much left to be deserved, to be achieved over there. The kind of income inequality, wealth inequality, social inequality, it's rapidly growing. So really, I think the question that we need to be asking here is, what is it that the governments are trying to achieve over here? Are you only trying to maximize profits? Because that's what's happening. If COVID decimated the livelihoods of crores of people, it simultaneously meant the huge amounts of profit for some of the leading companies in India. This is the data that's available there. So it's just that profits are being maximized, whereas the workers are still living on literally starvation wages. I mean, it's a matter of shame that in a country like India, which where we are claiming that we are developing, we are moving forward, and all of us want that for our country. But the country can't develop if the people are left behind. If people are still going to survive, like in a state of Karnataka, garment workers are being paid 9,000 or 10,000 rupees wages per month. That's minimum wage. And that's minimum wage that you will find across all sectors in the state. And still, Karnataka is said to be a state that has a relatively higher minimum wage. Whereas the constitution talks about living wages, which is far higher than minimum wages. So I think really this notion of development, this notion of growth, it's not necessarily the growth of the people. It's just about one section that's going to be more and more made more and more rich, that's going to get more and more capture more power in every sense of the word at the cost of the people. Surely that's not the development or the race that we should be in.
So in recent years, there's been a really strong narrative against trade unions that they're bad for business, that striking employees create a hostile work environment. What do you make of all of these like sort of claims?
Yeah, I mean, I think basically, see, what you want is a person or an entire class of people who are willing to work 70 hours a week, maybe 80, who will very willingly uh, take whatever wages are thrown at them, who will not demand even for a weekly off, will not demand for any festival off, will not demand for any kind of social security, who will agree to be thrown out of their jobs at any given point in time. That's the kind of workforce that the state is trying to move towards, and that the employers want today. Now, unfortunately, we live in a democracy. Unfortunately, there's something called the constitution that exists in this country. There are these laws that are there to protect the people. And I think it's really very angering beyond a point. When you already see the daily struggles that the working class is going through, the majority of the people in this country struggle even to eke out a decent life at this given point in time. You don't have houses, the number in terms of access to health services, access to civic amenities, the kind of health services that you can afford, the kind of education that you can afford to your children. And I remember this, one contract worker many years ago telling us at this one protest that we're having. He said, "My single biggest sorrow is that even now, he was 38 or something at that time. I'm still unable to give my parents a decent life. And I work hard. And I still cannot afford that." So all this bunkum about trade unionism is just, I mean, it is just that, it's bunkum. If you look at if you look at the number of workers who are actually organized, it's very small. Most of the workers are in the unorganized sector, and that unorganized sector is the most exploited. A very small section of the workers are actually organized, and where they're organized, they're talking about constitutional rights. Where they're organized, they're talking about statutory rights. They're not asking for a share of your industry, though actually that's something that they should be asking for.
So, what do you have to say about people who point to states like Kerala or West Bengal, where there's been, strong left trade unions, and that they say that these trade unions have harmed these states? What do you make of these claims?
Actually, see, strong trade unions are not just in Kerala and in
That's
West
right.
Bengal. I mean, if you were to look globally, also, you have extremely strong trade union movements in so-called Western developed countries. And in fact, most of the workers, the kind of benefits that they enjoy today, is because of those strong trade union movements. So if you look at even say Kerala, for instance, it has a very good minimum wage, definitely better than other states. It has I think what better literacy than most of the country. It has better human development indices than other parts of the country. I think on every box, right box actually gets ticked over there. So I wouldn't imagine why that's not a that's not a decent enough aspiration to have for every other state. And it's not like businesses have been driven out of there. Of course, they still have their businesses over there. But the problem that we have in our country is really not that. The problem is that there's an attempt to create this race to the bottom, to reduce workers to slaves, which is what the unions have been resisting, which is what people will resist. And any self-thinking person, is going to resist being treated like some kind of a commodity. That's ultimately what the workers are being pushed into. So it's a matter of great. Gujarat is supposed to be like greatly industrialized, but look at every single human development indicator over there. It has the worst literacy. It has the worst kind of malnutrition cases over there. You look at the kind of social and economic inequality that you have in the state. So I'm saying really, again, it boils down to this: when you talk about development of the country, what is it that you really mean? Is it just the development of a handful of corporate houses, or is it the or carrying the entire country along? That's where the fundamental difference is. So at any given point in time, you can blame the trade unions. I remember there's a very famous quote of Ambedkar. There was this argument being made that there's too much of state intervention in labor policy. So the state should actually step back, some kind of a deregulation. So let me just read what Ambedkar actually says. So he says that there's this talk that the capitalist class should have liberty to do, to conduct their businesses. So he says, obviously, this liberty is liberty to the landlords to increase rents, for capitalists to increase hours of work and reduce rate of wages. This must be so. It cannot be otherwise. For in an economic system employing armies of workers, producing goods en masse at regular levels, someone must make rules so that workers will work and the wheels of industry run on. If the state does not do it, the private employer will. Life otherwise will become impossible. In other words, what is called liberty from the control of the state is another name for the dictatorship of the private employer. So ultimately, this is what the employer wants. This is ultimately what Mr. Narayan Murthy wants and every other employer wants. They want their dictatorship to run in their industries. They don't want any rules. They don't want any laws over there. They want to treat workers in every which way possible. And what is the underlying fight? What is the underlying reason for that? It is to maximize their profits. If they are so concerned about the nation's growth, I mean, they can very easily donate their wealth to the nation. No one's stopping them from doing that. One does not see that happening, but you want the worker to sacrifice even that 1 hour that they may have with their parents or their children or their friends, or maybe playing football, strumming a guitar somewhere, playing a tabla somewhere, who knows. But you want them to give that up in the name of development, in the name of competing with China and whatnot. That is patently unfair.
My last question is, we're in Bangalore, the IT capital of India. There have been a lot of complaints in the recent years, basically calling IT companies as sweatshops. Do you think that things have improved or changed in the last few years?
One thing that has definitely changed is the number of workers standing up to the kind of discriminatory treatment that they've been getting over there. Now, see, IT is like a it's like this it's like a umbrella term for everything in that sense. But IT includes those who are working in your call centers for 15 to 20,000 rupees, and then you can go all the way up to the other software kind of industries. And these are definitely sweatshops in that sense of the word. So irrespective of the kind of wages that they earn, the fact is, what are the kind of labor relations that exist over there? What are the production relations that exist over there? What are the kind of rights that are afforded to these workers? I find it very surprising. Many a time, IT worker who's facing trouble would come, and you'd give them advice. And my colleagues in my office, they've been fighting several cases, ensuring that IT workers actually get what's due to them, even in the labor courts. And I know it's a very hard battle that they fight in the courts, because the IT industries, they have so much of money that they can pump into litigation, which they will pump into litigation but not give to the workers. But many a times workers come up with this very basic question that we've been told that we cannot form a union, we cannot engage in any kind of collective bargaining, that it's illegal. That's the kind of message that is being sent by the managements over there, whereas you obviously have the right to organize. That's one of your fundamental rights. So that is something that is definitely changing. There needs to be more of that, that should happen, in terms of and I'm not talking only about, there's one part of the IT industry which is your engineers, etc., etc. But if you go to another section that is working within the IT industry, which are euphemistically called your housekeeping staff, it is all 100% contract labor. These are workers who are subjected to any and every kind of exploitation, in terms of denial of minimum wages, in terms of denial of any kind of organizing, social security, so on and so forth. Now the state has to intervene here. The state has to ensure that this section particularly, who are doing the your gardening, your drivers, your housekeeping staff, etc., that their rights are protected. So I think there's still much that requires to be done over there. But it's not just IT. I think there's an organized workers is always better for a democracy, because an organized worker is an enlightened worker, is a better citizen, is somebody who can drive this country forward. One rich capitalist really not going to make too much of a difference in our democracy.
Okay, thank you so much, Clifton, for speaking.
Thank you so much.